What's up, you guys? Teddy Striker here, and during the lead up of UFC 315, I was hearing a lot of talk about breaking your opponent and taking somebody's soul, and this was mainly coming from Bilal Muhammad. And Bilal was saying things like, "Yeah, I broke Leon, I took his soul, and I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna break Jack, and I'm gonna take his soul too." Now, Bilal obviously didn't break JDM, and I don't think he broke Leon either. Leon, yes, he was clearly losing the fight, but in round 5, he was able to reverse the position, land some nasty elbows that opened up a cut on Bilal, and then he almost choked him out. He nearly finished Bilal towards the end of that fight. So I don't consider that an example of breaking your opponent, and what I think breaking your opponent actually is pushing your opponent past their limits to where they might be physically breaking, mentally breaking, or just breaking in general, where they'll get so tired and maybe look for a way out, or they'll just be in complete survival mode because you have given them no hope of winning the fight, and they're essentially just there to go the distance and maybe just to survive, or at times if they're really done, you can find a way to get them out of there. But how do you actually break your opponent? And I think I've come up with 5 ways to break your opponent in MMA. And to really illustrate this, I've chosen 4 fights, 2 grappling examples, and then 2 striking examples, because this is MMA and you can win the fight on the ground or on the feet. So those fights are going to be Usman versus Woodley, Khabib versus Edson Barboza, Max Holloway versus Calvin Kattar, and then Peter Yan versus Jose Aldo. With that being said, let's get into the first key to breaking your opponent, and that's going to be pushing the pace. Now, obviously, all these fighters are very well conditioned, they're professional athletes, but there is just some things that they are not prepared to do in there, and one of those things is to constantly be pushed backwards, get hit, or get taken down relentlessly without really having any room to breathe. Usually, they're preparing, they're, maintaining the distance, they're fighting their fight, and they're finding rest in between. But then when you get someone who's just constantly on you and pushing the pace, pushing the fight, then you don't really have that time to rest. You're constantly having to deal with someone in your face, which makes the fight a lot harder mentally and also physically. It's hard physically because you're actually getting hit, you're taking damage, and also you're moving backwards. So you're using energy to try to get away, but you're still getting hit and maybe taken down. And then mentally, because you don't really know what to do, so you're kind of starting to panic, and you're just doing things that are out of desperation at times. So ultimately, to break your opponent, to start breaking your opponent, you got to be the one that's pushing the pace. The second key to breaking your opponent is to nullify their strengths. So one of Edson Barboza's best attributes is his kicks. I mean, this guy has some of the best kicks in the UFC. He's super fast and powerful with them, and he stopped a lot of opponents with his legs. So Khabib took away Edson Barboza's kicks by constantly getting in his face and not giving him that space to really be able to generate a lot of power and kick Khabib with the end of his legs. Then there is Tyron Woodley, who was known for his explosive right hand, and the way that Kamaru Usman took this away was whenever he was pressuring Tyron Woodley, he would make sure that he was moving slightly towards the lead side of Tyron Woodley, towards his left hand, so that he wasn't putting himself in line of that haymaker overhand right that Tyron Woodley had dropped so many of his opponents with. And then you have Calvin Kattar, who was known for his dangerous boxing combinations and his knockout power, knocking out multiple featherweights. And whenever he would touch people, they would respect his power and they would sort of disengage and move away from him. But Max Holloway, what he did was he would evade the shots, or maybe sometimes he would take it too, and then he would answer right back and get back into Calvin Kattar's face, which made Calvin Kattar think, hold on, he's taking my best shot and now he's attacking me. I got to be careful. I got to set this up better. And now all of a sudden, Calvin Kattar is thinking a lot more, and he's being a lot more cautious about the way he's throwing his boxing combinations. And then the third key that I have to breaking your opponent is to exploit their weaknesses. And let's start with Tyron Woodley. And one of his weaknesses is he gives up octagon control very easy. He's way too comfortable going backwards, and Kamaru Usman took advantage of this, and he controlled the whole octagon. And then another weakness for Woodley is his fence wrestling. He's a good wrestler, but against a cage where he can be controlled and held, he is a little bit too comfortable there too. And the problem with that position is it's entirely a defensive position. You're constantly having to defend your opponent's grappling or your opponent's striking, whether they're going to clinch and then land elbows or knees, or just work takedowns. There's too many threats from that position, and Woodley wasn't able to deal with it that well. And then when you look at Calvin Kattar, one of his weaknesses was that he relied a little bit too much on the high guard. He wasn't really moving his head. He was just moving backwards in a straight line as well, which left Max Holloway able to extend his combinations and continue to work and start to hurt Calvin Kattar, because Calvin Kattar's defense became a little bit too predictable for Max Holloway. And then there was Jose Aldo. And Jose Aldo, he may have really explosive boxing combinations, but he does leave himself wide open to be countered at times, because he does take a bit of time to get his hands back to his chin. And sometimes maybe when he's throwing one hand, the other hand isn't quite as high as it should be. And Petr Yan started to take note of that, and he started to counter Jose Aldo and really start to hurt him. Because, when it was just at range, Jose Aldo was actually defending really well. Petr Yan was having some trouble just landing whenever he was starting his combinations first. But when Aldo was throwing, Petr Yan was starting to counter him, and sometimes he would throw away from him to really start to get to Aldo and really start to hurt him. The next key to breaking your opponent is to have diverse offense. If you're just throwing the same things over and over, your opponent is going to start catching on and making adjustments. This is also a high-level fighter, so you gotta, even though you're winning and you're pushing pace and you're doing all these things, you still gotta be able to mix things up and be unpredictable in there. Now, if you're a striker and if you're just punching all over again, that is going to get predictable, and your opponent is going to start using more like boxing defense because they're just expecting punches out of you. But if you start adding kicks in there, you're actually making it easier to land your hands and let your boxing go, because your opponent is going to be thinking about the kicks, and then you can, start finding the openings for the punches, or you can start using your hands to set up your kicks as well. You can use elbows, knees, and even if you're a striker, you can go for a takedown too, just to really keep them guessing and give them even more things to worry about. And if you're a grappler, same thing, you can strike instead of just constantly grappling. But also, what you can do as a grappler is to just change up your takedowns. You can go for your regular wrestling, single and double leg takedowns, but then you can also go for some throws and some trips to really throw your opponent off and get those takedowns easier. And the last key that I have to breaking your opponent is to have a consistent strategy. If you're at a point where you're winning the fight and you're minutes away from securing the victory, maybe it be by decision, you gotta keep doing what got you to the dance. You gotta keep winning the fight and doing what you were doing previously, because the more time you're not doing that, the more time you give your opponent a potential chance to get back into the fight. Some examples that come to mind are obviously Kamaru Usman versus Leon Edwards 2, where Kamaru was winning, but in the last minute of the fight, in the last 2 minutes, he kind of stopped pressuring Leon, and he stopped getting him back against the fence and stopped wrestling, and he suffered a brutal head kick KO where Leon, you could argue he was close to breaking. He needed his coach to light the fire back under him, but if Usman kept that strategy going, he would have for sure broke Leon and won that fight. Another example is Derek Lewis versus Alexander Volkov. Volkov was winning. He was doing a good job of keeping the distance, but then he started to kind of, try to intercept Derek Lewis coming in instead of just moving away from him like he was doing before, and he ends up getting clipped and going to sleep. The last example I have didn't result in a loss, but it nearly did. Here, Leon Edwards is kind of, just there, kind of coasting, not really doing much, and then he nearly gets put to sleep by Nate Diaz in the last minute of the fight. So you always, even if there's 30 seconds left, you got to keep that strategy going. You got to stay consistent and really work hard to keep on breaking your opponent. But that's all I've got for how to break your opponent in MMA. To quickly recap what I talked about, the first thing was to push the pace. The second is to nullify your opponent's strength. Third, exploiting weaknesses. 4, having diverse offense. And then 5, having a consistent strategy. With that being said, thank you guys for watching. God bless. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. And I will see you in the next one.